everyone for joining us on this webinar today. This webinar is a part of a series we're running at Secure Agility, the Cloud Insights series, predominantly focused around reducing the cost of cloud. Now, where this fits into, I guess, our journey at Secure Agility is the optimized stage of your cloud journey with customers. So past transition and manage, and really looking at ways that you can optimize things like your cloud costs, your cloud security, or in this instance, your cloud backup. So today we're focused on having a great conversation with the team from Veeam. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. Ian, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. How about yourself?
Yep, we're doing well, surviving this lockdown. And Zachary, how are you?
Exactly. Yeah, doing great. I'd love to go out and about at some time, but we'll wait and see when that happens.
Yeah, awesome. Well, look, guys, thank you again for taking some time to have a conversation with us today. Our topic today is really about how we can reduce the cost of cloud storage. Now, we've been having a few conversations over the past few weeks about how backup plays into that. But before we get into the topic, I guess, Ian, it'd be great to understand solution architect. Talk to us a little bit about your role at Veeam. What do you do day to day?
Yeah, so I suppose I mostly, if I sum it up, I advise customers about risk. So be that technical IT risk, be that business risk, or cost and things like that to the organizations. So that's sort of, from a high level, that's sort of what I do.
Yep, so providing that advice. And Zachary, I'll throw you a different question here. I mean, how did you end up in the tech industry, mate?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. I started off in the print industry, and there was one day when I had 3 customers who didn't even know each other. They all said to me, "Zach, you're a young guy." This was a little while ago. They all said, "What are you in print for? We're not printing anything more. We're all using software. We're all doing things online." And it was at that time that I knew that I needed to make a change.
Awesome. And obviously joined the Veeam team and enterprise account executive. So day to day working with the customers and obviously collaborating with Ian as well on solutions there with Veeam. To introduce myself, I'm Soren Reichholtz. I'm a principal consultant here. My primary role is working with vendors and clients on the technologies that we take to customers to improve those business outcomes. But my background's definitely in cloud. So I'm very excited to be talking about and introducing and hosting this series monthly for the Secure Agility team. So let's get into the topic. I mean, Ian, let's talk about cloud. How did we really get to cloud? What drove organizations, I guess, to adopt this new term? I mean, it's been around now for a few years, cloud, but what really drives organizations to adopt that?
Yeah, so ultimately in one word, it's probably innovation. So companies realized quite a few years ago now that IT has the capability to really drive revenue and really make an impact from a competitive perspective. But ultimately, they can't do that if they're spending all their time keeping the lights on. So it's being able to give that keep the lights on thing to somebody else to look after, and they can help drive innovation to help drive the company forward.
And obviously, cloud changed, I guess, the cost model for how organizations were consuming these types of services. So previously purchasing assets. I mean, what really drives the cost of cloud in an organization? What are the levers, I guess, in terms of cloud?
Yeah, so I think it's not going in with your eyes open. So I suppose if you think about if you were to buy a car, when going into it that it's not just the ticker price that's actually on the car, but that is the full cost that you're going to be paying. There's the petrol, diesel, electricity that is for running that car. There's servicing, there's rego, there's insurance, there's tires, the list goes on. But you sort of know that when you're going into it, and as a consequence, you can budget for it. So if you, as an example, if you were to replace those tires by going to your Toyota dealership, then it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive than actually going to a local garage to get that done, and you might actually even get a better service. So it's going in with your eyes open and knowing what the costs are.
Absolutely. And look, I guess I produced this bit of a storyline of, how is all this cloud transition really impacted the ICT budgets and spend of an organization. Now, I actually joined the IT industry. It would have been somewhere in sort of early 2005. So I remember a time before cloud. But in essence, what really drove organizations from my perspective to adopt these technologies really was the increase in bandwidth. So the technology was now more accessible to be able to consume that. And ever since 2010, we sort of had Office 365 start to explode, the migration of workloads into cloud. The cloud cost and SaaS subscription costs of organizations have grown exponentially. Even if you just think about it personally, the different subscriptions that you now have on your phone for all of the different software that you have, times that by the size of the organization, that's grown. Now, the interesting thing there is IT assets have also increased. So organizations are now managing more and more devices and now managing more and more costs. So what that's done is it's created this absolute explosion, I guess, in these variable IT costs, which then need its own form of management. And what's interesting in that is when we're looking at that from a cloud storage perspective, as you were sort of referring to there, Ian, it is the consumable. It's the item that you consume from the cloud, and optimizing the way that you store things in the cloud is going to ultimately control the cost as much as humanly possible. So I guess for us there, the big question is, I mean, how do most organizations back up in the cloud today?
Yeah, so typically it's an afterthought, right? So companies select the cloud that they want to go to based off, ultimately what they need to do to drive their business forward, and which is what they should be doing, without a doubt. But they tend to get there and then think, we should probably protect this data as well. And then they look at what cloud mechanism there is to be able to do that. Typically that's snapshots or a cloud provided backup service. But they are really good technologies, but ultimately they're quite expensive. So think car dealerships when I'm talking about that.
And I think we've got this sort of examples that we sort of see out there. Do you want to talk us through, different organizations, I guess, will be at different maturity stages in backup and recovery, as we sort of know just from the standard way that organizations have been backing up. But talk us through these sorts of examples. We sort of tiered them into, I guess, 3 examples of customer scenarios. So what's the most common?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's most common is exactly what I just said. So people will go to whichever cloud it might be that they've chosen, and they will use the inbuilt snapshot technology or inbuilt cloud protection technology that the cloud actually provides. And they're great technologies, don't get me wrong, but they can be quite expensive. Going that next step forward would be actually using ultimately a backup specialist product, something like Veeam Backup for AWS, Azure, or GCP, that's able to minimize your cost in that cloud, but also be able to give you a lot more functionality as well than what you would typically get from a cloud produced product. And then taking that one step further, this is not necessarily for every customer, but if they have a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud strategy, then with something like Veeam Backup for Azure, you have the ability to move that data between clouds, to protect things across clouds and back to on-premises, and do all of those sort of recovery requirements that you may require.
Yeah, and what's interesting there, I guess, is when we look at the most common, and I'll just use an example. I was working with a customer the other day, and I think they were spending something always near $4,000 a month or $5,000 a month just on the snapshot backups of their environment, which was almost 10% of the cost. So it's quite interesting when you look at that and the software then applying into that scenario. But also,
it really
I guess,
ramps up.
Yeah, and then also the next component there as well is when we look at that optimized state, really looking for things like disaster recovery environments where you may have idle infrastructure or warm infrastructure sitting somewhere, which could be used to actually push into the cloud to access those kind of containers and really access that agility. There's obviously a lot around how that needs to be architected to drive the different cost optimization areas. But what I wanted to do is we might bring Zach into the conversation, because Zach, we were talking about a few examples and customer examples where you'd seen a good reference point for how customers transitioned their backup and what was sort of achieved in what time frame. Talk to us a little about this example. We obviously aren't listing names, but talk to us a bit about this example from the insurance company. How are they backing up prior to using Veeam? So you're on mute, Zach.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's a very similar story to what Ian mentioned earlier, where backup was an afterthought. There was a project, the customer told me about a project meeting towards the end where someone asked, do we need to back this up? And the deafening silence that followed meant yes. So they put something in place. They went and turned on the native AWS backup tool and began taking daily snapshots and retaining those for, well, in this case, forever. They didn't know what their retention policy was. So the project was launched, and a few months down the track, they noticed that their spend was much higher than expected, which was when we became involved. You know, those snapshots could have been sticking around for 7 or 10 years, but there wasn't a problem with their environment. It was giving them the performance and the protection that they required, but it was costing way more than they expected.
And this is to Ian's point earlier, where a lot of customers have rapidly transitioned to cloud to access the benefits, whether it be the operational management or just even the agility of those sorts of platforms. But in this instance, backup was that afterthought. You're saying
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we were actually able to help them in quite a big way. In this case, they had the 400 instances in EC2. They had their retention policy in place, but they were doing that in a very expensive way. What we were able to do is intelligently manage the life cycle of those snapshots, tier them into cheaper tiers of storage, without compromising any of their performance of their backup system, but deliver a much better financial outcome to the customer.
And we're seeing here, I mean, the example there is 70 to 75% reduction in backup costs. I mean, that can be quite attractive. Do you have sort of an example of what that would look like in a monthly fee for those kind of instances?
Oh, look, I mean, we deal with customers of all different sizes. If we take the example of the customer you mentioned earlier, spending $4,000 per month just on backup, with this level of improvement, we'd be getting that down by $3,000 they'd be only spending $1,000 a month in that case. But it doesn't mean to say that you need to have a big environment, although a big environment, a bigger percentage of that is going to result in lower costs. Veeam can help out any sized environment.
So I guess in this scenario, how long did it take because that's the ultimate goal for the investment in technology. So we buy the software, we invest in the technology. How long did it take to, I guess, realize that outcome for this client?
Look, in this case, it actually took them longer to decide to do anything than to have the solution implemented. By the time that they said, yes, we want to have Veeam in to help us out here, it took them 2 weeks to have a fully implemented solution. We can act very, very quickly, but in this case, it took them substantially longer than that to decide to change, which is, I guess, something you see all the time as well.
Well, it's getting mind share, right? So obviously, when you're talking about the benefits of the risk reduction, and we're seeing here, faster restoration times, potentially the other benefits of sandboxes and DR and bits and pieces, but it's getting the mind share of the business to really look at the optimization of how things are happening. For us, it's how can we capture that conversation as early as possible so that we can design the right solution from the start and avoid that waste if
Absolutely.
possible. Which, in that transition phase of our cloud journey, I think that's where we can really show a lot of value and promise in that. So look, I guess for most businesses, like technology is an investment, right? And ultimately we're looking for a return on that investment. Ian, I might just sort of bring you in here because I think we even started our journey and conversation around the ROI calculation that you do with customers. Do you want to talk to us about that sort of how you approach that conversation in not only just the Veeam software component, but also the different technologies, the different clouds, and how to actually work out what the best return is for the customer's needs?
Yeah, sure. So, you're right. We chatted quite a few months ago now about how Veeam can help in this sort of world. So So first of all, to the people listening, your first step is to reach out to Secure Agility. They can engage us and we can actually help make your life a lot more simpler in actually understanding your ROI, because we've done all the hard work. So we have built a TCO calculator internally that all we need is a few little bits of information from yourself, and we can easily spit out what sort of savings you could potentially achieve. But if you wanted to do it yourself at any point, what I would probably say the first step to actually look at things is awareness. So it's about looking at what those snapshots and those cloud backup is actually costing you, and then look at what the cost of the storage for the cloud object storage actually is, and compare those two, because typically they are actually stored in the same place. However, the cost is very different. So that's something to have a look at.
Yeah. And there are customers that obviously even have on-premise environments that are pushing their backups into the cloud as a part of that process as well. So just looking at that sort of optimized, and I'm looking at the advanced state here, which is just moving away from snapshot backup, very simple change on some of these cloud platforms, can ultimately get there. So I guess when you're adopting these technologies, what new costs are actually introduced? Is it just software licensing?
Yeah, you're right. So there are actually a lot more line items that you need to consider. So there's things such as the licensing costs, like you say, but also compute storage, transactional APIs, and there's quite a few that you need to consider. So we've, as I said, we've done that hard work to sort of look at the detail for you.
Yeah, awesome. And that's actually a really good point here, because I mean, these are short, snappy little information bites for customers in terms of how they can reduce those costs. So if anyone who is listening would like to learn some more, certainly send an email through to inform@Secure Agility, or you can ultimately use the contact form at the link there. We work very closely with the Veeam team, and we'll be very happy to run through an ROI for you if you are interested in looking at what your cloud backup costs are and the potential to reduce that. So look, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking some time to talk us through that today. I really appreciate the collaboration in this process, and look forward to working with you guys. In terms of the audience as well, we're running these webinars, as we said, monthly. So the next webinar for us is really to explore how to reduce your overall cloud compute costs. So this is quite an exciting one. We've got some big savings that we've seen for customers in terms of how they can optimize workloads without decreasing application performance. So certainly register for that. We'll be sending out some emails to everyone who attended. And ultimately, for anyone who's watching, if you're interested in following the story and journey, certainly connect with us on LinkedIn at the link that's there. Gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.